Welcome to Windev, the series where I cover the development of Microsoft Windows one video at a time. In this episode, we'll be covering Windows 3.0 and Windows 3.1 being released on May 22nd, 1990 and April 6th, 1992 respectively. The reason why I didn't do a video on Windows 2 is that, well, there's no leaked development builds. I can't cover the development if there are no builds to look at. We do know how development started, so I'm gonna start with that. Windows 2.0 started as Windows 1.1 shortly after Windows 1.01 was finished, with the main focus being overlapping windows, first being toggleable, then switching to having every window being able to overlap. In late 1986, the product was renamed Windows 1.5 and then Windows 2.0 shortly after. The product was supposed to be released in early 1987, but it ended up being delayed. Development builds do exist, with 2 alpha releases and 2 beta releases being sent out in June and July 1987. The first release, Windows 2.01, ended up being released for Compaq's Desk Pro 386 machines in September 1987, with 2.03 following in December, 2.1 in May 1988, and 2.11 in March 1989. This is where we reach the start of Windows 3.0's development, with build 14 being compiled on the 22nd of February 1989. This build is very picky with the configuration you run it with, so I recommend you install it on at least a 386 processor with Compaq's MS-DOS 3.31, since that version has an installer built in. Once you run setup, you'll notice that it's very different from Windows 2 setup, being a batch script similar to that of early Windows 1 builds. Once setup finishes, you'll have to edit config.sys at the root of the C drive and add this line to it. Once we get to the desktop by running Win386, we can see that the interface is still the MS-DOS Executive from Windows 1 and 2, with the very vibrant color scheme applied. If you open win.ini in a text editor, you'll see that there are 2 commented out options for background patterns, which would eventually make it into the final release. Removing the semicolons from one of the 2 options and booting up Windows will show the patterns on the desktop in all their glory. Other than that, there's not that much else in this build, besides drop-down menus now having drop shadows. The file menu has Task Manager in it, although it doesn't do anything. Moving on to build 55, which was compiled on the 2nd of January 1990, we can see that the setup has been completely overhauled, looking closer to that of the final build. This build adds a boot screen, the last build didn't have one, which looks pretty similar to that of the final build, except that the colors are different. Going to the desktop, we can see that the main interface is now Program Manager, as opposed to MS-DOS Executive like in the last build. In addition to that, all the applications from the final build have been added. That's pretty much it for this build. There aren't too many changes in later builds, besides the addition of the final boot screen in RC2, before we get to the final build of Windows 3.0, released on the 22nd of May, 1990, with support ending on the 31st of December, 2001. While we're at it, let's take a look at the Multimedia Extensions release, which was released to multiple OEMs in late 1991, and believe it or not, there is one development build of this release. Build 59, compiled on the 7th of November 1990, was included in the Windows Multimedia Development Kit version 0.9. Features in this build include an early version of Windows Media Player, a new clock application called Clock, a new help interface, 8 new system sounds, including a startup sound, an updated control panel interface similar to that of Windows 3.1, and 11 new screensavers, a feature added in this build. Moving on to the final build of Windows 3.0 with Multimedia Extensions, released in late 1991, this build adds some new MIDI files, some new sounds, changes the startup sound, and adds a shutdown sound. Earlier in 1991, Windows 3.1 started development, with build 26 being compiled on the 5th of April 1991. This build isn't very different from the RTM of Windows 3.0, except for the default title bar color being purple as opposed to blue like in Windows 3.0, a new logo in the About dialog, and an updated boot screen which says Windows 3.1 as opposed to Windows 3.0. Build 34F, compiled on the 7th of June, contains a new setup interface, letting the user choose from a quick or a full installation. Build 43E, compiled on the 27th of August, features an early version of the Windows tutorial, and replaces Reversi, Can You Believe It, with Minesweeper. Build 61D, compiled on the 17th of December, adds startup and shutdown sounds, a boot screen similar to that of the final build, with Final Beta Release on it, and a setup closer to that of the final build. Build 68, compiled on the 21st of January 1992, introduces the famous AARD code. A great video by the Nostalgia Nerd on the subject will be linked in the description. That's where we get to the final build of Windows 3.1, build 103, being released on the 6th of April 1992, with support ending on the 31st of December 2001.